morning. Okay, let's invite some people in. Alrighty, good. Ooh. Oh my gosh, something's happening on Facebook. So few people. That's really not. All right. I think people, they don't get the message so fast, it looks like. All right. Let us say good morning. A good morning it is. A pleasant one here in Montreal. Good morning. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zichron Kadeshim in Montreal, Canada, where it's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. We welcome, as we always welcome, we have Mayor Andra, Marcy, Michelle, Lindsay, Jeff, welcome, and Christo, and Curaçao. We have Omari, Reggie, and some other names I can't make out. And we have with us Dan Boker Tov, Andrea in Phoenix, good morning. Eugenia from Calgary, Boker Tov. Davida and Liba, good morning. From New York, John is with us from North Carolina. Deborah from Kitchener is with us. TJ from Australia. It's only 14 hours later. And who else? People aren't getting the class notification. That's quite obvious. I don't know why. Yeah, I don't think we've had so few people joining at this moment. Gonna find out what's going on over here. You don't get them, Deborah, the class notification? Please let me know what's going on if you get class notifications, and if you don't. Tony's with us from Costa Rica, David from Montreal. Okay. Let us begin our learning. And then from the learning, we'll entertain questions, as we always like to. And then after entertaining questions, comments and insight that others might have to please share. So we are in chapter 7. This is a lengthy chapter. This is sort of like the main chapter of Shar Yichud, of understanding God's unity. So we have spoken about two levels of divine unity, a higher one and a lower one. And we gave many metaphors for this. Of a king. There's the king in his personhood. There's the king in the functionality of a king. In personhood, the king is head and shoulders above the people. That's why he's the king. Right? Now, again, I'm not talking about, or Tanya's not talking about a king that's an evil king and is not really a king, but a despot. Because really, think about it. Most kings are despots. They're not really kings. Because the concept of a king is ein melech b'lo am, that there is no king without a nation, and that the nation freely chooses the king as opposed to being imposed upon. Now, once the king is chosen, then the king's chosen, right, by the people. But there's of freedom to choose. And in reference to God, that's the freedom that we have to choose. And that's what God created the world. He wants to be the king. But he wants us to freely choose it. So he has to create us as independent individuals that we can come then to choose him as our king. And in our relationship, by the way, there's many other aspects of the relationship. There's a parent-child relationship to God and many other components. But that's not the discussion here. King means, therefore, as ruler, that's Malchus, the attribute of Malchus, that is the what's the word I'm looking for? The activating force of creation. And creation, world, is defined by time and space. And the question then becomes, how do we understand time and space from the power of creator within creation? So we understood it in two dimensions. One is that Malchus in its source, in other words, the king the way he is to himself, not in the function of the king, bound up in his source. So likewise, Malchus in its source, which we explained is Shem Havaya. Oops. Oh. Right. That's Adon, master. This is God's name in its source, I mean, as it's bound up there, as you see. So likewise, then time and space, which Malchus is the attribute that is the responsible. I guess I don't know if responsible is the right word, but is the one that is the creative force to make time and space. So in that instance, time and space is bound up in its source, as Malchus is, and therefore there really isn't time and space. It's like the ray of sun within the sun. That's the higher level of divine unity, which means in Bittul b'Mitzias, is the term Bittul b'Mitzias means complete nullity of being, and that's like the ray of sun within the sun. Right? Then there is the way Malchus in its function, the king, as it comes down to the people. So Malchus is coming down to worlds, to be the direct source of time and space. So in that there is a reality of time and space. But what is its ultimate reality? Is the power of God that vests itself in it and therefore is nullified. But there it's not like a ray of sun within the sun. That is like, there is a sun, there's a ray, but it has a source, and it's nullified to its source. So it's a something, it's a yesh, it's a something, but that it's bittul yesh, it's a nullification of the yesh, meaning that it is nullified to its source, but not in its source. To its source. So, and that's a lower level of divine unity. Now we're going a step further. That's just a brief overview of what we explained. Now, so based on this, what comes out is that God, in the act of creation, has not changed. And that is actually from Malachi, from Nach, that says, Ani havaya lo shanisi, I, God, have not changed. Now, what does it mean that God hasn't changed? To what, in what reference is that? Actually, we say in the daily prayers, before God created the world, there was only him. After he creates the world, there's only him. That's in the morning prayers. So, what does that mean, though? Is that only in reference to the essence of God? How about the functionality of God? Right? In other words, take it in the human condition, there's the human in the essence of who we are and our soul, and then there is the functionality of us, right? Now, if we were going to create God in our image, then of course, we're going to say, just like we change, God changes. Now, hopefully we change for the better, and therefore we'd say, well, God is also changing for the better. And of course, that is erroneous. So the Alter Rebbe explains, when we speak about that there's no change by God, we don't mean only in the essence of God. We mean even in his knowledge, his awareness. We have awareness because we're created in the divine image, so we also have awareness. In our awareness, we do change very much so. We change very much so. What do I mean? Well, so the Alter Rebbe explains, and this is based on Maimonides' teachings. When God knows something, he's not knowing something outside of himself, he's knowing of himself. He's knowing himself because we are part of him. So let's explain what that means. In the human condition, this is a concept that we've learned previously, and it's a very important one that we really wrap our minds around in order that we can understand the unity of God as best as possible. So in the human condition, there are three elements when it comes to awareness. There is me, the knower, right? The one who's aware, right? Which is my soul, let's say. So there's me, well, we'll just call it me. And then there's the knower. So that's the knower. Then there's the knowledge, which is my brain that has an awareness of something. And then there is the known, that thing that I'm aware of. So in the human condition, our knowledge becomes, what we become aware of is superimposed, added to us, right? It wasn't always there. I didn't always know 2 + 2 = 4, right? I didn't always know of and aware of Clubhouse or Facebook or Instagram. Wasn't always aware of that. And that becomes added knowledge. I wasn't always aware of, people that come and join us and learn. At one time, I didn't know who Tim was. I didn't know who Dan was, or Greg and Cindy and so on. Now, some I know more than others or whatever, but the point being, it's added to me. Why? It's because my knowledge and me, the knower, and that which I know are three separate entities. I'm a composite of the knower and the knowledge. The known is totally outside of me, that becomes a part of me, but it is indeed separate entities that are a compound in the human condition. Not so, says Maimonides, when it comes to God. God is the knower, the known, and the knowledge as one. As one. Totally as one. And as Maimonides says, that's something we ultimately can't really comprehend. Because in the human condition, there is no such thing. It's three separate entities that come together. And that we are a compound of them. So therefore, there are things actually I don't know. And in the future, I will know. And that becomes now superimposed or added to me by God. God doesn't not only change in the essence, he doesn't change, but even in his awareness, even in his knowledge, there is no change. There's nothing added to him at all. This is faith that transcends intellect, but we're able to apprehend this truth, even though it lies beyond the mortal intellect. We can understand that. Now, as a result of this, there's no plurality by God. There isn't something else for him to be aware. So in the end, what is he when he knows something? He's knowing himself. And therefore, everything is totally and absolutely one with him. Nothing concealed from him. For me, there's things that I'm not aware of right now. It's concealed from me. I'm not aware of, on Clubhouse there in Marcy. I don't know where you come from. I don't know what you ate for breakfast, if you did eat breakfast. I'm not aware of those things, right? And the like. But by God, he's totally aware because he's an awareness of self. Now, parenthetically, this comes up then with the question of, freedom of choice. If God's aware, is that forcing our choice? No. That choice, that the will that we have to choose A or B is, and I'm going to get too much off topic on that right now, but it doesn't compel our choice because you're aware of the choice, and even giving vitality as a result of the choices that we make. That's maybe a little difficult to wrap our minds around, but that is the fact. Now, just as a parenthetical interesting point, this idea that Maimonides says about God, that he is the knower, the knowledge, and the known as one. So there are the Maharal and others take issue with this. How could you speak about that God is an entity that has a parameter, has a definition to him as the knower, and that doesn't change? God is not knowledge. He is not wisdom. That's an attribute of God. So the Mekubalim, the Kabbalists, explain that there's no contradiction between the idea that the essence of God is beyond any kind of parameter, any kind of definition. That's absolutely true. God nonetheless contracted upon the essence in order to emanate from him 10 spheroids, 10 divine attributes. And those attributes are not something, a compound makeup of him, but they're a simplistic whole oneness with him. And being that they're one with him, just as God, before he created the world, it was only him, and God didn't change in the act of creating the world. So likewise, not only the essence didn't change, but even the knowledge of God, because the knowledge of God is bound up in one with the essence of God. And this is the concept over here. Make sure I didn't leave something out. So therefore, there is no plurality, because there isn't two forces here. There's only just one force. I'm going to get more into this idea. Actually, tomorrow we're going to get into some heavy-duty stuff. This is heavy-duty, but even more so. The tzimtzum, kipshutai, not kipshutai. So, therefore, God's awareness and knowledge, whether it's the entirety of the universes and the galaxies, or a little mosquito in the middle of wherever, there's no distinction. There's no higher or lower, because it's all of him, and a simplistic whole oneness. That's it. Any questions, any comments? Is that clear? We've dealt with this before in chapter 2 in the first part of Tanya. And here there was in a different focus. That was about the soul and where the soul comes from. Here we're talking about the power of creator within creation, the unity and the oneness of God. So therefore, God's not like purveying from above and let me see what little Ronnie Fine is doing down there. Or maybe he needs some help, or maybe he needs a little push. And God is aware, sometimes people say, the The older man that didn't come to synagogue at one point, after many years he had come, and then all of a sudden he doesn't come. He says, the rabbi comes to him and he says, Rabbi, you know what? I'm just afraid that I'm going to get under the purview of God, and I'm getting older. I figure if I don't come to synagogue, I'm going to slip behind and he won't see me. He won't see me, and I'll be okay. Everything will be okay. No, God sees everything because he's seeing it of himself and not outside of himself. So there isn't something that is closer or more distant, and therefore everything is equidistant and equally present. So therefore God animating the world right now in the awareness of me and what's going on in my life, God is ever present and aware. Now, I'm just going off topic right now because this is not what the Alter Rebbe says. He doesn't bring any consequence to this awareness that we have. But I'm bringing a consequence, and that is that God knows what we're going through and giving us whatever we need in our lives that we could get through what we need to get through. That's the faith that we have of the fact, of God's perfect unity and God's true ultimate goodness, pure goodness. So that will help us. All right. So, do we have any questions, Davida? There's something with Facebook that people are not coming on so quickly. They're not getting notifications. Could you please mention that in the chat, in the comments, so we could look into that and try to figure out what to do. Okay. And if there's some suggestions on the best way to deal with this, and Davida, if I can ask you to put it all together so we can. Okay. Daisy, in one class I said that God is everywhere and everything, and that we see, and that we see is Him. We see also ourselves, so are we also Him? Absolutely, we have a part of Him in us. Absolutely. That's our divine soul. The truth is, yes, that's a part of His inner being that we have a part of. Which that's not what we're talking about here, by the way. In our soul, we have a piece of God, the inner part of God within us. We are now talking all about the external aspect of God in the fact that He is creating. He is creating a world that is coming from His. Is that really what He wants? No. That's who He is, creator? No. Who He is, I'm the Lord your God who took you out of Egypt. Personal God that we have a relationship to. But that's not the discussion here. But it's important that we always give context to everything that we're learning. We are not learning about our relationship with God per se or specifically. We're learning about God as creator and appreciating what that means, that He is creating every moment, not something outside of Him, but it is united and one with Him, and two dimensions, a higher, lower, as we explained, as we gave a brief review earlier, and now explaining it further in the attribute of God's knowledge, that there too, it's an awareness that is not some outside of Him, a higher or lower or something added to Him, not at all. And therefore, no, there's no plurality, there's only a oneness, and as we explained, the consequence of that is great. So Daisy, yes, we do have, and but that's a deeper thing, and that's actually, in the first part of Tanya, the first 53 chapters was about the personal relationship with God that we have. Here we're talking about God as creator. Okay. Okay, I see people are getting technical difficulties. Okay. I don't see any other questions. Unless I missed something, Davida, please let me know. Batya, Mayor, Marcy, David, Tim, Lindsay, Jeff. If you have something to share, please do. Go ahead, Jeff.
Hi, Rabbi.
Good morning.
It's so simple today. It's very clear. Yeah, but so I really am having trouble. You mentioned this kind of in passing, but kind of the idea of free will.
Yes.
That is, if there is unity and God, as we said, past, present, future, up, down, northwest, north, south, east, west, and so on. Doesn't you kind of said this, but doesn't God root for us? I mean, that is to say, everything is possible, and what is the connection? How are we to make every moment that goes forward, closer to God? But there's an infinite number of choices in how we act and what we say and so on. So, but you said God is not active in that way.
He's not active in compelling our choice, generally speaking. Generally speaking, we have the freedom of choice. And he doesn't compel that. And he doesn't compel that because, the freedom of choice gives us the capability of having a relationship. A compelled relationship is not a real relationship. It's not a real one. It has to be mutual. So on God's part, it's mutual. And like you said, Jeff, and it's very true, God is rooting for us that he wants to connect to us, and that we should connect to him the way, not just on human terms, but on godly terms. And that's what Tanya is trying to give us the inside scoop, to appreciate the way God perceives and sees things, right? He doesn't see things and know things the way we do. So when we have that appreciation, understanding, that gives us a dimension of an awareness about God that brings us closer to him, because now we understand how he is closer to us, and that's, so to speak, in the way that he roots for us, and that he's giving us the tools that we can implement freely implement the tools, the teachings, the divine wisdom, the mitzvahs, and so on, that will give us that capacity to have a real relationship with him. And when we have a real relationship with him, then we're real people for ourselves, to the people around us, and we'll have real relationships with them, and we'll change the world ultimately for good. So yeah, absolutely. Now, as you mentioned at the beginning about free choice, so the free choice, I don't know. Let's say you're when you're aware of something, and there's a breakdown in the metaphor over here, right? So when you're aware and you see, I don't know, someone is in their someone is paddling in a paddle boat and they don't see that Niagara Falls are, 100 yards ahead of them, and they're going to, go down those falls. The fact that you're aware of that doesn't compel them to go down those falls. Right? Because you're aware of it doesn't compel it. So now here's a breakdown. The difference is that that person's outside of you, so it's not compelling. Here it's that awareness is within God, but God chooses not to compel that choice and to make that ours in order that we could choose to connect or disconnect. I don't know if that's a good metaphor or not. Does that help you at all, Jeff?
Well, it doesn't help me intellectually, but it helps me personally, yes.
Well, again, intellectually, there's a breakdown in the metaphor, but it's still a metaphor that we can get a little glimmer of an appreciation of the idea that awareness of something doesn't compel the thing. So in God, the awareness doesn't compel, even though you would say, what do you mean? That awareness is within him. It's awareness of self. It's not compelling it. So, yeah. Yeah, it's a little tricky, I must admit. And it's not so, Daisy, I think I answered. What happens, Davida, what happens when a person is disconnected? Is there still a relationship with Hashem? How does Hashem see that relationship with him? Absolutely. Just because someone does something wrong, by the way, that's going to be the next third book, which I'm going to tell you more about some of the things we're going to do there. But yeah, well, let me ask you, if you have a child and your child does something really nasty to you, doesn't mean it's not your child anymore. It doesn't mean you've disowned them. I hope not. Well, that might be something in today's world that might be more prevalent than ever. I hope not. No, it's still your child. You're still connected. Although there might be a disconnect on some level. And again, we're going to get more into that into the next book about what it means, that disconnect, and the capability of doing tshuva as a result. Mary, the little voice in the back of the brain that attempts to tell us an action is right or wrong, is that God speaking within us? It might be my rational soul that's speaking, it might be my divine soul that's speaking, and it might be my animal soul that's speaking. That's a good question. It might be, we need to know. It depends what it's telling me. If it's telling me, I don't care, then it's your animal soul. If it's telling me, oh, there might be a serious bad consequence from this, that's your rational soul talking. If it's telling you, oh, that's a disconnect, that's your godly soul perhaps talking. I just gave some examples so you can know some of the differences. Hopefully that helps a bit. Daisy, you had two other questions after the first one. Did you put question marks before them? If not, if we are one with God, there is no nearer or farther from him, right? So why are we talking getting closer to him and getting far from him? Whoa, good question, Daisy. Daisy's from Jerusalem. The era of Israel makes you wise. Wise and good question. So the essence of us is always bound up with God, just as the parent is always bound up with the child, right? But maybe only in the essence we're bound up, but maybe in the moment of doing something wrong, I'm disconnected from God through the words that I've just said that are maybe hurtful words to somebody, or the actions that I took that were, inappropriate actions. In that moment, there's a disconnect. In the revealed behavior of me, there's a disconnect. The inner being is still connected. The behavioral part of me, the functionality of me in my thought, speech, and action, there's a disconnect. So yeah, then we are distant from God in our behavior at that moment. And the whole point ultimately of this world is that the truth of me, the core of me should reflect on the outside. So I could be true to my true being, that I'm connected and one with God in my soul, but that's in the essence of my soul. But I gotta reflect that on the outside. And that's what we're here to do, to bring that on the outside. So in that sense, yeah, there is far and distance, right? An action of extending your hand and giving charity is a closeness to God in that act. The act of taking the same hand and hurting somebody with it is an action that brings you distant from God. And that's even in the vitality that you're getting in the moment. When you extend your hand to do good, you're getting from God's holiness, from his inwardness. When you are extending your hand to do ill, you're getting from klipa, from sholish klipas, from the three unholy. So it's all coming from God, but it's coming from a very reduced, contracted light of God that is not coming from his inner will and desire. I hope that was clear. More on that to come. But good questions. Okay, Maria Lazata says, I know now that being one with God is sole and the only purpose of our lives. Right. Well, being one with him and expressing that oneness, exactly. Yeah. Now, don't be sorry for such an obvious statement, because sometimes the obvious needs to be truly expressed. And it says, I know now that there is no dualities in Hashem, as a knower, known, and knowledge. Duality is, in this respect, is our perspective. This is how we perceive the creation. Well, we would without the teachings of the Tanya. Right? Okay. And Tanya gives us the answers to almost all spiritual questions and builds bridges. Actually, the Alter Rebbe said in the preface of the first book that it gives us the answers to all our spiritual questions, believe it or not. It's a pretty bold statement. But for those who've been learning, probably see that. Okay. Beautiful. Oh, my dear friend Benny from Mexico, Chabad in Mexico in, oh my gosh, I forgot now. Welcome. I'll send regards to your brother who I'm going to speak to now, I hope. Beautiful. All right, folks. As always, this is wonderful. To be continued. Tomorrow, put on your thinking caps. Not that you didn't do that today, but we are starting into a very interesting and contentious issue amongst many of the great scholars, Torah scholars, that is. Very interesting point. All right. I think that's it. I'm Rabbi Ronnie Fine, coming to you from Chabad Zurich and Kadesh in Montreal, Canada, where it's a privilege and a pleasure to share with you the Tanya. Have a wonderful day. Thank you so much for joining. And please, Davida, help me with this, what's happening. People not getting notification. Whoever on Facebook's not getting notification or not on time, please make note of that. We need to look into this. Thank you.